Porcelain Children. Joe would wonder many times after that night what had made him turn around at the front door and go back out to check on the bus again. He had covered Miller's late shift as well this evening, so instead of going back into the depot, he parked up alongside the slatted shed. In the couple of minutes it took him to shut off the engine and scuff his boots across the gravel, it occurred to him that he was forgetting something. The blackness of November seemed to be closing in around him. It was a night, his father used to say, would chill the heifer from the inside if she was left out. Did things to the mind that breed a chill. He pulled his tawny hat with woolen ear flaps over his bald head as the passenger door slid open again. And he whistled low as he walked along the aisle, readjusting armrests, fixing seat covers, not knowing what he was looking for, besides rid of the restlessness. So when he found the baby, nestled into a plastic seat with its handle, some 3 or 4 rows from the back, half concealed under layers of pink blankets, he forgot to be surprised and knew it was best just to take her inside and set her up on the kitchen table. There now. He was pleased how easy it was to rock her on the uneven hardwood table. He switched on the soft orange lamp and turned the dial on his oil stove until the kettle hissed. The child was blowing air bubbles through her lips as she slept. He decided it was a girl with all the pink, though he knew that wasn't the way of it anymore. He flicked on the radio and snapped it off again. If he called someone, they would ask him why he had brought her home, and he was no good at explanations. He never knew what the real right answer was. So he pulled the curtains and sat down in front of her. He shifted and realised his head was hurting just as she started to fluster. The child gave a chuckling cry and flung her elbows away from her tiny body. A bottle that had been tucked under the blanket at her chin fell onto the table. The teat reminded him of how he used to warm the bee stings for the lambs when he was a boy and his head stopped hurting. He poured scalding water from the kettle into the steel pot he used for his morning egg and stood the bottle into it. The child went on crying, but he knew only the cats would hear and it wouldn't bother them either. He tested the milk on the inside of his wrist. Babies and small animals couldn't be all that different. But then he hesitated before he put the teat into her mouth. Having a baby lamb's heart beating against his shirt was one thing, but it didn't seem right to hold a real baby that way, so he just suspended the bottle in the air as she glugged, like the lamb would. And as she filled up, she forgot to suck, so he nudged the tip of the teat against her pink gums until her jaws moved. By the time it was empty, she was asleep again. He'd been driving since early morning and it was time to be tired. So while she made fits and starts of breathing, he nodded off too and crossed arms right there in front of her. Usually Joe woke with the birds and had his breakfast as morning yawned over the back field. He always fed the chickens and locked them in again before he drove to work. But now he opened his eyes with his head pressed against the kitchen table. It was still pitch black out and he blinked before he remembered that under the mound in front of him was a sleeping baby. He rubbed his face with one big hand and pressed a finger against the child's white cheek to make sure she was still warm, alive. He reached for the handle of her carry cot. She would be better sitting on the floor while he shaved. He wouldn't know what to do if a lamb fell off the table, so he wasn't taking any chances. It was too early yet to call Miller and tell him he wouldn't make the round today. He played with the idea of bringing her with him. Imagine the boys looking on at him reversing out of the depot, with her in the front seat beside him, passengers talking about her as they got off at the way they hummed over each other's children. They might have something to say to me, he said out loud. Wouldn't be so bad, would it, little one? He splashed his razor in grey sudsy water. She was awfully small down there on the floor. When she woke the next time, she didn't cry. He told her about the house Martins living under the gable end. It was a small place, he explained, but he didn't need much of anything. Had sold the farm when his father passed on. Farming was dead anyway, with cattle costing more to feed than they ever made. And he liked driving people where they needed to be. He spoke in a voice just above a whisper, used to hearing it that way in his head. And she closed her eyes again, so he joined her. And they both slept away in the square, warm kitchen with the high ceiling. He in the chair by the stove, she on the ground at his feet. And when the child stirred, she smelled like the hen house and was squalling. He negotiated her out of the seat onto a clean towel where she wouldn't get cold. He shushed her and struggled with fasteners and buttons and found there was as much of the stuff as it smelled like. She had been lying on a few of those soft plastic nappies with the sticky bits, and amid the blankets was a packet of what seemed to be wet tissues. He pulled them out and studied them, and then he wiped and folded and chatted as he managed to make a fresh thing stick around her and get her back into the carry cot. He was relieved to find a couple of sealed bottles of her milk rolled up in the blankets as she was protesting the seat and chewing her fingers like a suck calf. Thanks very much.